Hi everyone. We'll just give it a couple of minutes before we start. I know there's quite a lot of people coming in from the lobby, so thanks very much for joining, and we'll give it a couple of minutes and we'll start very shortly. I'll apologise in advance if it looks like I'm not looking directly at the camera. I've got a big screen and a little screen, and I'm trying to see who's coming in versus the content I'll present. So if I look like I'm looking away, I'm not looking for the postman. I'm genuinely looking at the screen. Okay, let's just see. Again, just while we've got quite a few people joining, we'll give it a couple of minutes. Thanks everyone for taking time out of your day. I can see there's already quite a lot of you who have joined. Some familiar names on there as well. So lovely to share lunchtime with you all. I think is probably the best way to describe it, which is what the series was aimed at. Okay, we're a couple of minutes in. I think what we'll do is we'll start, and then Betty, if you don't mind just admitting as we go through, that would be really helpful. So hopefully everybody can see my screen, and welcome to the first webinar, the first episode of our webinar. I've just seen somebody's message there. I'll give it a couple of minutes. I'll give it a couple of seconds. If there's still some people being admitted, it can be quite difficult to hear. So I'll give it a couple of seconds.
I think we're good to go, Kerry, with
Yeah, okay. I'm just oh, it's always the way, just having a little bit of there we go. Okay, so welcome to the webinar. As I've said, it's really lovely to have you all with us. My name is Kerry Redmond. I'm the head of growth here at Giant. I've been in the industry for the last nearly 15 years and worked across a number of spaces, quite regulated environments, both financial services, aviation, insurance, local and central government, and bring a fair wealth of experience to what will be a thought leadership series on the pre-employment screening topic. And I'm joined by our lovely head of product, Kelly. So Kelly, I'll just hand over to you for a quick introduction.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Kelly Pugh, the head of product here at Giant. So I'll be talking mainly throughout this series about the use of technology, lots of compliance management elements, and very much part of that today. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. So this series is aimed at current clients, previous clients, customers who are potentially looking to work with us in the future, plus then key stakeholders and experience across the industry, whether they sit within operations, HR, talent. And really what we're looking to do is create a community to talk about HR, onboarding, pre-employment screening. And as we go through the series, you'll see there's lots of different terminology, and hopefully in this episode, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail shortly, you will see the basics. So we thought it was best to start with the basics, and then we'll create more content as we go through. So the aim is over a 12-month period. We've created a community that drives thought leadership within a space that really isn't significantly covered within other HR forums. So through our experience, what we've seen is that there's lots of HR recruitment forums available in the market. Some of them lightly touch on pre-employment screening, onboarding, in-employment screening, but there isn't significant amounts of content in relation to specifics in this area. So our intention over the next 12 months is to drive a webinar series. Some of them will be podcasts, some of them will be more of a panel event talking. We'll invite industry experts in, and we'll talk about a range of topics across each webinar. Each webinar probably will last 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how excited we get. Both of us do like to talk, so we'll see how we get on that front. But you can see there on the screen, there's a range of topics that we will cover as the time goes on. And this is a series, so feel free to join as many or as little as you like. And I think maybe to share some detail of those of you that are on the call and you probably can't see each other's backgrounds and things like that. There's a lot of you who work within the financial services space, a lot of you who work within the defence space, aviation, insurance, and sort of local central government, including healthcare. So there's a real range of sectors involved within the call today. And I think that's really good in order to be able to drive some really good thoughts and discussion. So on that subject, there's a question box available as we go through that Georgia's monitoring, that Betty's monitoring. Kelly will also be looking at some of the questions as well. If anybody wants to ask questions as we go through, please just pop them in the chat box. If anybody wants to wait until the end, we will have a Q&A at the end as well. So this episode, what are we looking at? So we're looking at the introduction to the webinar series. So back to basics. What is pre-employment screening? Why is it essential? How do you create an efficient and, most importantly, legal screening program? How does technology come into that? How do we allow technology to streamline our processes? When is technology appropriate? When is technology, not a replacement for the human eye? And then we'll go on to maybe some tips around your own internal compliance journeys and what that looks like and what you might be actually trying to achieve out of this episode. And then we'll end on a Q&A. So let's get going. A little bit about Giant Group, and this absolutely isn't intended to be a sales webinar in any way, shape or form. But I think it's always good just to give you guys an idea as to who we are and what we cover. But we're a global screening organisation. We've got 350 clients across 58 countries. And I think quite impressively, 98% retention rate since our inception, which was over 7 years ago now. So we've come on significantly year on year. Our leadership board is over 100 years worth of experience that none of us want to admit, but I think what's good about that is that it brings in a lot of industry specific experience, whether that be within regulated environments, within quality assurance environments. There's always somebody who's got that deep knowledge of whichever area or topic that might be. And it's great that we're able to pull in that experience as and when that it's deemed appropriate. So what is background screening and why is it essential? So it's a series of checks, and they're carried out by an employer or by a group of companies, organisations such as Giant or any other pre-employment screening provider, and they're aimed at validating the background of an individual ahead of them coming into your business. Those checks can be carried out on permanent resource, contingent resource, or temporary hires. Often what we will see is that those checks differ depending on the type of engagement and the type of hire. However, some companies do choose to have a uniformed approach and will do the same types of checks on each of those hires. What we typically see more of is that it's defined by the type of role an individual will carry out as opposed to their type of engagement. So we'll discuss that as we go into a little bit more detail, but effectively it's a series of checks conducted on an individual. Within that, there is some legal onus. So there's a legal onus to validate the right to work of an individual. So that's really important and actually links to our next episode, which is specifically looking at the digital identity framework and how that can be implemented within your business. But we look at the legal right to work as probably the most fundamental part of that background screening program, because that is where you need to create your statutory defence as a business. In some ways, as we know through the digital framework, that can be done through providers. In other ways, for individuals who are on maybe tier 2 visas or have share codes, there are alternative ways for that to be validated. But the most important note is that that must be validated prior to an individual starting work. That's the legal side. What we then find within environments like financial services space, insurance, aviation, defence, regulators then define their own specific set of criteria for candidates to meet ahead of them being able to start work. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail as the series goes on. But I think it's most importantly to take away from this is that the legally for you as a company is the right to work, and then whichever rules or regulations the regulator puts on you. Some employers aren't subject to regulators, and they are then specifically required to look at their company, the risk, the exposure, and then define a set of employment onboarding criteria that is fit for purpose within their organisation. And often that's where we can come in and give them some advice and guidance on what that industry looks like and how they sit within maybe their competitors and things like that. So why do we do pre-employment screening? And we've touched on it slightly, but I think the bottom question there, what you can see, who wants to hire an individual who may put others in danger? Really key thought. Risk the reputation of your brand. Each of you must work so hard to protect that reputation of your brand. You will all have really strong employer value propositions, and for us it's about taking that EVP and making sure that we continue that through a journey, but also it's about the protection of your brand. That one candidate could absolutely ruin the brand that so many people have worked so hard to create over a long period of time. So who wants to put that brand reputation at risk? Or who wants to put the spotlight on an organisation for all of the wrong reasons? We've all seen the news stories where passengers have snuck into planes and all sorts of things, into the undercarriage of a plane, and nobody wants to be in that position. So a lot of it is through risk mitigation, looking at the quality of hire, providing that assurance for key stakeholders. So often key stakeholders, senior leadership teams won't be intrinsically involved in the onboarding programs within organisations, but what they want to know is that there is a fit for purpose process involved, and that each of the hires that are coming into their business aren't specifically going to create a challenge, put the organisation in danger, damage the brand, or put the spotlight on that individual for the wrong reason. And then we look at the legal side of things. So many of you will be aware, some maybe not, there's a new economic crime bill due to be signed off. It's currently just going through an audit process with some minor amendments, but it is due for royal assent, we imagine, shortly. And that is putting more onus on a company in relation to economic fraud. So what that's actually doing is making employers, and certainly through some of the conversations that we've had with our customers, set up and think about how robust is their pre-employment screening program? What does that look like? How are they mitigating the risk of those hires through that onboarding program? And I think what we will see as if and when that bill comes to light, that a lot of either regulators will review what screening looks like, or employers will look at enhancing the standard packages that they have within their business, ultimately to provide more protection and sort of support within their statutory defence, that we have checked specifics on X, Y, and Z, despite the fact something may have happened. It's all about creating that protection for your organisation. So I think some stats really help when we're talking about pre-employment screening. If you're sat in that 5% of companies that don't do pre-employment screening, you're sat in a very small percentage of organisations across the UK who actually don't do anything other than the legal requirement. So 95% of companies across the UK conduct screening of some form aside from the legal requirement. So it may be that they include referencing, it may be that they include criminal record checks, it may be that they include social media profiling. There's lots of different options which we'll come to shortly, but ultimately 95% of companies across the UK are conducting some form of check. And I think actually that leads into the next step, which is the big number on the screen in front of you. There was a study done by a university not so long ago. £24 billion is the estimated annual value that recruitment and employment fraud is costing in the UK. So that fraud can be anything from lying on a CV, enhancing the job that you've done, prolonging a period of time that you may have been in somewhere, lying on an application as to the seniority you may have engaged whilst you're there, right the way through to the provision of fraudulent documents. In 2020, 44% of all fraudulent documents that were provided and reported were of passports. So we're specifically conscious all the time when we look at documents, specific documents that candidates provide to us, because we know the stats are so high. It's so easy to be able to obtain fraudulent documents. And I think through a highly trained resource, you have to be able to know exactly what you're looking for. And lots of companies we're seeing now are taking internal measures to be able to prevent some of that fraudulent activity as well. So lots of internal training courses around the provision of documents that candidates are preventing, and really upskilling their recruitment and HR teams to be able to spot those documents that aren't quite right, shall we say. Okay. And then 1 in 4 companies in the UK have experienced a bad hire. We've all been there. We've all had somebody where we thought, oh no, this person just isn't working out for us. And of that 1 in 4, we wonder how many of those could have been prevented had we have done a little bit more CV analysis, had we investigated that individual's background a little bit further, or had we maybe done some additional checks such as social media profiling fully to understand an individual's background. So lots of figures and numbers there to to sort of trigger some thoughts, and we will share these slides afterwards as well. So with those thoughts in mind then, how do we create an efficient and a legal screening programme? There's lots and lots to think about. I think the first port of call is whether it's defined by a regulator or whether you're defining it yourself as a company. There's lots of different checks that you can look at including within your criteria. So as I said previously, lots of people try to do it by role type as opposed to length of engagement. So dependent on the exposure of the individual, the information that they will see within an organisation, and how key that information is to business critical activity, often depends on how much detail or how much background we will investigate into a client. So what you can see there is probably our most common checks that you can see. And they often vary dependent on the length that we will go back. So, for example, employment referencing, typically we will see 3 years or 5 years. If you're undergoing or have a criteria to do a 785A check, that probably goes back to 10 years. But typically 5 years is what we're seeing from an employment history timeline or a history timeline, where we're validating academic references. What we're seeing a little bit more of in the more recent times is social media screening, media screening, and look at an individual's activity online. So that includes whether they're members of any protest groups, whether they're members of any adverse groups that then may damage brand. And that's really important as well. So we've got an episode specifically coming up on that as well, which will give a real insight as to what that looks like in the industry at the moment. You can obviously see quite a lot of other checks there that we're seeing day in, day out. Criminal record checks is an interesting one because Obviously, within the UK, that's split UK, England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. Overseas, each country, each territory has its own requirement, and it's about understanding what that turnaround time looks like and building that into your recruitment process and your onboarding timeline as well. And we always say, us being able to give you that detail, or a provider being able to provide you with that detail, really will support your onboarding program, because then effectively it's about thinking about how long that candidate has until they join you. And I think one of the most important things to note is that this is so significantly about the candidate journey. It's about getting a balance as a business and understanding that you don't want to ask too much of a candidate. You want to get the right amount of information at the right time to be able to make that informed decision, but you also don't want to breach a candidate's privacy. So it's about that fine line between being able to satisfy the requirement of either your own internal checks or your regulator checks versus intruding on the privacy of an individual. So it's really important that as organisations, you think about the experience of that candidate right the way through that programme. Crafting a solution then. So what are the key things that you need to think about? And if you've got an internal solution already, do you tick each of these boxes? So the biggest question to ask yourself, and it's one that is it's a real talking point in the industry at the moment, especially within spaces like financial services and aviation and healthcare, is in-house versus outsourced. And there's pros and cons to both. And again, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail as time goes on. Understanding GDPR, touched on it slightly, consent and how it's applied and in which circumstances. Understand your legal and regulatory compliance. So are you governed by a regulator? If so, what does that regulator say you have to do and at which points? So some regulators say that you have to do it at the point that the individual starts, and then you have to do rechecks at certain periods of time through their employment. And often that's managed very differently to a pre-employment screening programme. In employment is a little bit more around how you engage with people who are already in your business as opposed to potentially coming into your business. And then consistency. What does that consistency look like as you go through the programme? Is every candidate subject to the relevant checks that are right for them? And then understanding which checks are right for your business. And that's only done through engaging with senior stakeholders, recruitment partners. A lot of our content and information that we're able to present comes from our customer forums, our links into the industry, and our knowledge generally around the spaces. So it's really good to be able to talk to industry leaders, people who are sort of crafting those solutions day in, day out. Even if you don't choose to outsource, it allows you then to get that look and feel, and you know, how does that candidate again travel through that solution? Where is the legislation defined from? So there's just a few on here, but what you can see is some of the regulatory bodies, some of the legislation. DBS obviously is the UK criminal record checking programme, and the Home Office defines one of the major standards within the UK, which is the BPSS standard. And you can also see there FCA, who's obviously a big regulatory body, ONS again similar, and the CQC and HCPC, who will define the requirements within the healthcare space. So screening levels within the UK. This is the last slide that I wanted to cover before we maybe talk a little bit about technology. The standards you can see on the left-hand side, UKSB, BSI, and again the CQC and FCA, they are the regulatory bodies who define the checks that are meant to be carried out on some of the standards, or some of the most popular framework standards that you can see within the UK. You can see BPSS there, and then the subsequent levels that go beyond that. And again, that's a whole topic in its own right, BPSS being the framework, in order to then gain a more enhanced level of check, as you can see. 7858, which is the standard for security across the UK. And then there's a couple of healthcare frameworks there in the FCA, which defines the financial services framework. The only one missing off here is the CAA, who obviously mandates the landside airside process within the UK, where it's obviously had significant eyes on in recent times as to what that process looks like. And there's been some changes there, but actually now what we're starting to see is that the candidates are starting to travel through that process that little bit quicker. So how does technology streamline a process, and what does that look like? So I'm going to hand over to Kelly, who's our technology expert. So hopefully, Kelly, you should be able to see the screen and talk us through that page.
Yeah, thank you. So hi everyone. So during this series, we're going to touch on lots of tech-related topics. We've got digital right to work next week, and we'll do loads more on all of the different ways that we use tech here. So we wanted to sort of strip it back just across these next 2 slides, just to talk about the basics really and what tech can do behind the scenes. So let's look at using of technology within screening. So we look at how everything that we do here will make the process more manageable, more efficient, and obviously more successful. So we'll touch on some of the key points here. So seamless integration. So some of you and some of us may be using different platforms and different tools throughout the screening recruitment process, and that can often be time consuming and confusing for everyone. So integrating software with your screening tools is just going to create that more cohesive process, centralize everything, which of course minimizes the risk of that data being misplaced or misunderstood maybe. So next steps are to look at some automation. That's what we're all about here, and every step of the way we'll apply that automation and technology where possible. But for our customers, this means that we can automate those preliminary checks, make sure that the most important parts of the screening process are looked at first. So integrating that level of automation at that point will help you look at the right candidate. So that might be right to work checks, it might be credit checks, or anything that takes them out of that pot for you. So then alongside that, obviously real-time updates. So that data, all of the automation and the data that we're bringing through across each of the stages of the screening process, it's all about getting that visibility out there. It's all about getting the right information to the right person at the right time. And of course, tech helps us do that with real-time updates and notifications. And then all of that data is constantly being used, of course, by us to make sure the screening requirements are met. But there's that extra level that we can sometimes provide during the audit trails, the interactive dashboard. So constantly looking at that 360 view from the top, really, to see what the data is telling the story of your screening process, whether that's the results for the candidate, whether that's the pain points and some of the issues that we might be able to address to make that clearer moving forward. But we're constantly looking across the board just to get that top view on everything that's happening. So all in all, there's lots of systems that, like I've touched on, lots of system processes and tech that we're using. We'll touch on digital right to work, but really it's all about combining everything to create that screening process that's completely efficient and effective on getting the results that you need, but allowing you to focus on what really matters whilst understanding that you're collecting that knowledge and that data. And of course, that'll lead us into data security. And I think the next slide, actually, Kerry, is probably a good point to move into that, to look at the compliance elements, because the complexities of compliance should never be underestimated, but especially when it comes to employment screening. There's so much risk applied to certain parts of that. So even if there are lots of those tools being used that we spoke about earlier, and there are maybe different parts of the screening process being dealt with in-house, maybe some are being outsourced, integrating the selective services and making sure that you've got that process to be more compliant and less prone to errors. So as much centralization as possible to make sure that there's just no risk of anybody overlooking some of those essential steps. Then that comes with real-time updates, this time from a legal perspective. So things are changing all of the time. I mean, we all know about the most recent changes to right to work and what that can do to your onboarding process. So having that preparation and time to, as we learned during that process, map things out properly, understand the compliance elements, and know when you need to make the changes and why and how. So having those updates, not just through the screening process, but from a platform or a source that gives you everything that you need at the right time to keep you prepared, is also quite important. That leads us into data security, obviously, the utmost importance for most processes, but particularly candidate screening. And we know how important it is handling this sensitive personal information. So even then, the stakes are higher. So again, a unified, secure platform, centralized information kind of acts as your safeguard. So you're storing all of your data in one secure location, and obviously regularly monitored and accredited depending on the solution that you're using. All of this ultimately, of course, is leading through to all of the compliance elements that we meet and we all need to meet, whether it's GDPR, whether it's global screening requirements overseas. All of those laws add another layer of complexity. So again, regardless of if it's one service or all of our services being used, compliance is built in with these updates, with how you need to be streamlining those processes to understand where the compliance elements come in, to know where the flags and alerts are. So the data that we're collecting, it does all of that. The technology that we're using and that is available globally will allow us to make sure that all of those regulations are met.
And I think it's really...
the audit trail.
Oh,
go on. Yeah, no,
sorry,
go on,
I was
Kerry.
just going to say, I think it's really important to think about, whilst each of these topics are absolutely key for creating a really tidy compliance solution, we have to think about how the candidate is engaged through each of these steps and the effect that that may have on the candidate right the way through the journey. So we think about how the candidate takes on GDPR, for example. Certain candidates don't want their data exposed, rightly so, in certain circumstances. So it's about you as a business having that ability to create a solution that makes the candidate feel safe, secure, that they know their data is being looked after, that they know that internally as a customer you've got the information that you need. But it's also about how that then is looked at and viewed by the candidate, and ultimately that's what we want to make sure the key messages is about how you define each of these steps within your processes internally whilst maintaining that key candidate journey. And it could be that those candidates come into your business, come into solutions via ATSs. It could be that they come from various different parts of the world because you're a global organization. It's about how that candidate fits into that journey to bring together ultimately a compliant delivery solution for you as a customer. And I think that's probably the fairest way to assess it, isn't it, Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of that comes down to the end product and of course the audit trail, because that's often important, especially when it comes to
that's what the regulators are interested
time.
in, isn't it?
That's right. So, we know that can be stressful, time consuming, gathering all of that information. Again, that centralized approach allows us to make sure that we're meeting the requirements, or you're meeting the requirements in the correct order. But tech is ultimately significantly simplifying the process. Again, full transparency, seeing all of the actions, accountability and ease of reporting, obviously, as well. I mean, that is,
and it's about
obviously
using
a main
technology in
requirement.
the right way, isn't it? And making sure that you've still got humans involved in the process where you want to maybe significantly look after your candidates. The technology underpins the human, doesn't it? Not the other way around.
It's that extra layer of compliance at all times.
So what we'll do is hopefully each of you took something from that, just as an intro to the season, if you like. I feel like I'm on Netflix. If anybody's got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the box or pop your hand up, and we'll unmute you for you to ask your question. But potentially, I think it might be through the chat box. Kelly, help me out.
I had a quick look. There's no questions as yet, but yeah, guys, feel free to pop some questions in. I can see. Oh, we have got some in the Q&A
I can
section.
unmute. So if anybody's
brilliant.
got a question, please feel free.
I can ask the question for you. So we've got one from Meg Barron. In our opinion, what part of the recruitment process should a company ask for right to work documents?
Okay, so I think for me, it's There's a number of different times when that can be asked. It's what works well within your organisation. So some people do it at the point of interview. Some people do it at the point of induction. Some people do it at the point that the contract is sent out. So there's a number of different number of times. If you have assessment centres or you have training programmes ahead of start of employment being engaged, a lot of people tend to ask the individual to do it then, or to ask for it then. But then we know a lot of organisations who ask an individual to provide right to work ahead of interview, and it's all about when that fits best for your organisation. Typically, what we see most is that it's asked at the point that the offer goes out, the request for onboarding comes through, and it is then formed as part of that. Just seen a question there from Zoe as well. What happens if you don't receive a response from a reference? Kelly, it'd be good for you to take that one if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So the referencing team, we have very strict referencing chasing cycles that streamline every part of the process, and that can be defined for different screening requirements. If there's a certain requirement to enhance that, that's possible as well. So if we don't get the reference back, there's a number of things that we can do. Obviously, we've got that contact with the candidate where we can refer to the frameworks in place to see what supporting documents can be provided. Maybe we can get some further character referencing in some cases if we're looking at unverified employment. But obviously this is an opportunity to quickly mention fast check.
Yeah,
so
I was just going to say
yeah, it's a later session, of course. So I mean, I think we do talk about fast check a lot. So that's our automated payroll and banking service, which gives us verification of employment dates and gives us verification of gaps in employment. So again, using tech in that space to provide that validation gives us that extra layer, so it sits nicely alongside our referencing process. And if we've exhausted all of those avenues and a reference is still unobtainable, we've got that data again to fall back on. That is obviously more comprehensive than the reference in any case.
Yeah, and I think it depends what's defined by the regulatory body as well. So in some ways, the regulator may say that the only backup is a HMRC document, a 5-year statement, or an SA 302, for example. Or in some circumstances, again, that's down to the employer. So that's where solutions like Fast Check, which links to an individual's bank account and shows inbound payments, and then that can be matched against an employment timeline. That's a really good way to quickly, that's a fairly instant check, validate that somebody has worked where they say they worked over a period of time. And we're seeing now that that's being adopted more and more across lots of different spaces. Initially where there was some reluctance, and we'll share the link. We did do a webinar on it not so long ago. There's a lot of detail on that, so we will share the link to that webinar afterwards as well. Christine, I've just seen your comments there as well to Zoe, so thank you. Thanks very much for that. Was there any other questions from anybody else? I think there is. I don't think I've missed anything there. No, hopefully you all found the session helpful. If there are any other questions as we go through, then of course please feel free to make contact with either of us. We will share the recording after the session as well, so you can always share that with your teams or link back to any of the content if you need it. Our next webinar is on the 19th of October, again same time, 12:30. Oh, I've just seen a question come through there. Hi Ashley. The question is, in the BPSS guidelines, how do you execute DV checks as part of the screening framework? Wow, right, okay, so this is a specialist subject and I probably could talk for about an hour on it. But basically, from a BPS, I can feel Matt, our CEO, going, Kerry, keep it brief. In BPSS, in order to execute DV, you need to have a sponsored body. So whoever your end customer may be, or if you've got the right sponsorship status to be able to grant DV yourself, what you then need to do is first and foremost do the BPSS on the individual. If it's a transfer of DV, then you can instigate the transfer of the DV with UKSV. If it's not a transfer, if it's a new DV, then the DV check can be instigated through the online framework. But again, that needs to be done by the sponsored body. So you can't actually outsource SC or DV with strap. That all has to be done by the sponsored body. What you can outsource is the BPSS element, and then that then can link into your own internal security controller. Another question there. What sort of checks would you do for Know Your Investor? Andrew, I'll come back to you on that one. I'll send you a comprehensive response on that outside of this. Probably will take a little bit longer to define a response on that one, but we will come back to you. Kelly, if you don't mind just taking a quick note of that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. We've got another question from Zoe. What is the average turnaround time for giant screening? So we just touched on fast check there. So there's a few different times that we can talk through.
So,
but yeah, that's the question from Zoe.
Yeah, so thanks, Zoe. I think dependent on what the checks are, every company, every workflow, every organisation, their processes are different. If you're looking at a fast check solution, those we can typically get those responses back within 48 hours, in some cases 24 hours. If it's a standard referencing process, that generally can take a little bit longer. So we say probably in and around the 10-day mark. But what that actually does is that allows for things like criminal records to come back where the SLA of the DBS is 15 days. So no more than 15 days. If it's regulated referencing, it's 30 days. But if you want to utilise that fast check service and you need to have quite quick turnaround referencing, then typically that can be done within 24 to 48 hours, depending on what that individual's background is. Just in, Zoe, what I might do is pick up with you.
Sorry,
yeah,
Kerry.
Zoe, I might just pick up with you separately off the call. I've just seen that you have got quite a few questions, but can you do criminal record checks for other countries other than the UK? Yeah, absolutely. So we work in partnership with globally in order to be able to provide global criminal record checks. So we can provide the guidance, the length of time, the average turnaround time, and the cost of each country on an ongoing basis. So there's a little bit of deviation sometimes with the cost of those checks and how quickly they can be turned around. But yes, in answer to your question, we can do them for outside of the UK. What I will do is I'll drop you a quick note outside of this session, and we can have a chat, and hopefully I can answer any more questions that you might have. Okay, I'll give it one last go. Is there any other questions? If there are, then either please feel free to. What I'll do is I'll put my email address in the chat box. If anybody wants to just drop me a line after the call, we can either have a chat or we can exchange emails and have a chat through there. And Kelly, we can loop you in as well. But other than that, it's been fantastic to chat with you all today. Thanks very much for the engagement. For those of you that asked questions, that was really lovely. Please join us again 19th of October at 12:30. Episode 2 is on digital right to work in the UK, and we have actually got one of our partners, Yoti, joining us for that. It's going to be more of a panel session, Q&A for the government provider, if you like. So again, really informative session, and that will cover bulk digital right to work checks as well, which I think is a really interesting topic at the moment. So yeah, we'll send you all a reminder ahead of that day, and if anybody wants to engage ahead of them, please feel free to reach out. Okay, thank you very much. Lovely to have you all join us today. Thank you.
If we could find all those. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.